Tonight, Keir Starmer condemns Israel in the Commons and calls for an end to the ramped-up military offensive in the Gaza Strip. The Prime Minister says he's horrified by the escalation in Gaza as the UK suspends trade talks with Israel and summons the ambassador. The Foreign Secretary denounces Israel's actions as intolerable but stops short of saying it's committed genocide. Plus, as the dust settles on the deal with the EU, what's the view from big business? We'll speak to the former boss of M&S, Stuart Rose. And 20 years on from when Malcolm Tucker told the minister to come the F in, auditions. All that and more with the reliably potty-mouthed Jonathan Gullis and Caroline Lucas, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Something has changed today in the way the UK is dealing with Israel. Language, tone, actions. It's like the rubber band being pulled has suddenly snapped. And the tension, of course, has been building for some time.
Foreign Secretary, is the UK doing enough to prevent genocide in Gaza? Do you agree with the UN that the world needs to act now? Are you doing enough to get aid into Gaza, Foreign Secretary?
That was this morning, and then this happened in the House of Commons today.
We're horrified by the escalation from Israel. We repeat our demand for a ceasefire as the only way to free the hostages. We repeat our opposition to settlements in the West Bank. And we repeat our demand to massively scale up humanitarian assistance into Gaza. The recent announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food into Gaza, a basic quantity, is totally and utterly inadequate.
Keir Starmer there saying the UK is horrified by the actions of the Israeli government. I don't think we've heard him being so forceful in his language before. Well, the UK has now summoned the Israeli ambassador and suspended trade talks with Israel over the situation in Gaza. And the Foreign Secretary had this to say.
I say now to the people of Israel, I want a strong friendship with you based on shared values, with flourishing ties between our people and societies. We are unwavering in our commitment to your security and to your future, to countering the very real threat from Iran, the scourge of terrorism, and the evils of anti-Semitism. But the conduct of the war in Gaza is damaging our relationship with your government.
And just in case there was any doubt about that relationship with the Israeli government, well, David Lammy had this to say about what Israeli ministers have been saying about relocating Palestinians.
We must call this what it is. It is extremism. It is dangerous, it is repellent, it is monstrous, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms.
Now, there will be some who think the government is still not going far enough, but this is a change, and it's a change that's also being reflected in other countries across Europe. In the last hour, the United Nations said no aid has been handed out today in Gaza, and it's urgent to get the first trucks carrying baby food inside.
Today, one of our teams waited several hours for the Israeli green light to access the Kerem Shalom area and collect the nutrition supplies. Unfortunately, they were not able to bring those supplies into our warehouse. So just to make it clear, while more supplies have come in to the Gaza Strip, we have not been able to secure the arrival of those supplies into our warehouses and delivery points.
Well, here to discuss this, we can bring in our duo for the evening, the former Conservative MP, Jonathan Gullis, the former leader of the Green Party, Caroline Lucas, and we're also joined by Sky's chief political correspondent, John Craig, as well. John, to you first, because it feels like there has been a shift in tone, at least, from the government.
Very much so, yes. I mean, the Prime Minister made his statement about yesterday's summit and so on, and then we had Mr Lammy's statement, and both of them went on for about an hour and a half. The Labour benches were packed for the Gaza statement, and you could hear there not quite heckling from the backbenchers, but you could hear when Mr Lammy was saying, I'll tell you what it is, they shouted out genocide at some of the backbenchers. And so I think that was some of the Labour backbenchers and perhaps some of the independent MPs as well. Now, you won't hear Mr Lammy or Sir Keir Starmer using that word, but one of the things that that Mr Lammy was saying in his pretty lengthy statement, he talked about a new dark phase. And he did really, as you were saying at the beginning of the programme, a really hardening of the language here. Priti Patel for the Conservatives was saying, well, words aren't enough. And she asked a lot of questions, and there were some quite tough clashes between Mr Lammy and Priti Patel. So we got all the criticism of Israel. Then we got the three measures that the government has announced today. So Mr Lammy said, number one, we've suspended negotiations with the Israeli government on a new free trade agreement. Now, there's been a lot of talk about trade agreements the last few days. India, United States, now the EU. It's not that long ago that Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, was actually talking about a deal with Israel being a priority. Well, you won't hear that now. Number two was summoning the Israeli ambassador to the Foreign Office. That was Hamish Faulkner, the junior minister, did that. Zippy Hotovelli. We haven't heard a readout yet of that meeting. And number three, of course, was those sanctions. Well, let me tell you a bit about those sanctions. Mr Lammy said there were seven announced in October. He said, today we are imposing sanctions on a further 3 individuals and 4 entities. Well, the most high-profile person is a woman called Daniela Weiss, who you may recall was featured in a documentary about Gaza. She's been described as the godmother of the settlement. She's also, the Foreign Office say, she's a high-profile extremist settler leader. So those are the actions. Now, in terms of what happens now, the Prime Minister was talking about what he called collective coordinated action. He mentioned the fact that he and President Macron and Mr Carney, the new Canadian Prime Minister, had put out a joint statement. Clearly, the Prime Minister is hoping that other countries will follow and get tougher with Israel. The other thing that came up in exchanges in the Commons, Mr Lammy's statement, it was John McDonnell, actually, and one or two others suggested, well, we've got a coalition of the willing on Ukraine. Why don't we have a coalition of the willing in Gaza to get the aid in? Because Mr Lammy, of course, stressed the need for that. It's
interesting. I can see you nodding along at some of it, actually, Caroline. John, thank you very much indeed. It does feel like there is this coordination, doesn't it? What is your take on what we saw today when it comes to Gaza and Israel?
Well, I certainly agree with you that there's been a change in the rhetoric, and that, of course, is welcome. But actually, unless there's a change in actions far more far-reaching than what's been announced, then that's totally undermined. So I don't quite know how either Keir Starmer or David Lammy can stand at the dispatch box, in all honesty, and talk about the fact that it's intolerable and extreme and dangerous, and at the same time continue arming the Israeli government in terms of giving those green lights to those export licenses that still mean that parts for the F-35 planes are going to Israel. So that has got to be the real litmus test about this, I think. I mean, when we heard about this trade agreement, I was staggered. I had no idea they were still negotiating it. Why hasn't that been stopped months ago? It's been 2 months since there's been the blockade of food into Gaza. We just heard that scary statistic from Tom Fletcher, the UN humanitarian coordinator, saying that we could be seeing, was it 12,000 children dying in the next 48 hours? I mean, this is beyond rhetoric at the dispatch box. We've got to take more action, and I'm disappointed we didn't see it.
I can see your emotion when you're talking about the words of Tom Fletcher and the children that could be affected as well.
I just think the UK is complicit in this, and that is a really, really awful place for us to be.
Jonathan, what's your take on this?
Well, I suppose I'm quite concerned with what I would call the performative nature of David Lammy in the House today by saying they're suspending the agreement, the trade deal that they're trying to negotiate with Israel. Ultimately, Israel is an ally. It's the only liberal democracy in the region, an important strategic region. Trade deals are a way of fostering good and healthy relationships and being able to use diplomacy in a way. By having this sort of performative measure that I think David Lammy has done by suspending it, doesn't help or benefit anyone at the end of the day. It's just a way of appeasing, I suspect, some of the Labour backbenchers. And look, as someone who is would want to remind everyone, Israel's at war because of the horrific invasion by a terrorist organisation on the 7th of October 2023. That terrorist organisation, Hamas, still has hostages in its possession in Gaza. We have seen hostages brought out onto the streets from the tunnels to hundreds, if not thousands, of Gazans cheering and jeering in celebration and, in fact, intimidating very much so those very people who were so cruelly taken, particularly women and children. So at the end of the day, Israel is doing what it needs to do to defend itself. But ultimately, I'm not comfortable with a blockade on food. Food should not be a weapon of war. And at the end of the day, what we do need is the Israeli government, and it may not be this current Israeli government, there may be an urgent need to have some sort of election in Israel where you get probably a more moderate tone, alongside a Palestinian a sort of leadership that is not Hamas, that means that we can come to a permanent solution to end this war.
I mean, what Hamas did, obviously, was utterly unspeakable. It was beyond appalling. But do you really think that the hostages are going to be safer as a result of the way that Netanyahu is acting now? Because I don't think they will be. I don't think he's doing any good for the hostages either, which is why at the weekend, I think we saw, didn't we, lots of Israelis ending up at the border protesting against Netanyahu's own policies over this, because they think that it's actually going to make their relatives and their loved ones even more at risk.
So I totally accept that challenge, but I would just point out again that the only reason Israel is taking this action is because Hamas has the hostages. And Hamas should have released hostages. They shouldn't have illegally taken people and massacred people. The genocide took place in Israel at the end of the day when it came to those targeted attacks upon the Israeli community. And so I struggle to have a level of empathy in some regard when it comes to, obviously, Hamas's action, who have themselves been stealing aid that has been going in to Gaza for their own benefit, as well as millions of pounds of money. And I find it unstomachable that the leadership of Gaza is hiding away in Qatar in luxury penthouse accommodation with hundreds of millions of pounds in their pockets.
We all do, but to make the citizenship of Gaza pay the price for that just feels utterly intolerable as well. Those millions of people did not connive with the actions of Hamas. They have been punished many times over, and we know that the collective punishment of people is in itself against international law, and that is exactly what Israel is doing right now. So my comeback
to that is, my first ever Westminster Hall debate when I was in Parliament was around the textbooks that are being pushed by the Palestinian Authority under the leadership of Hamas, which is obviously talking about pro-genocidal rhetoric, as well as obviously the wishing the death upon Israel.
That's not the individuals. You're still focusing on Hamas, and you're making the people, Israel is making the people, the citizens of Gaza, pay the price for a leadership which they I do not support either in terms
Caroline,
of what's
happening to them. We can accept that in Gaza, citizens, whether we like or not, have had tunnels dug from their homes down. They've had weapons that have been found.
The people have got,
and they have been cheering and jeering, as we saw on the streets whenever hostages have come up. So there is an element of responsibility that the people of Gaza also have to take.
Do you, as a friend of Israel, do you worry about Israel falling into Hamas's trap here by basically reacting the way it has done and turning the world against Israel as a result?
Oh, look, I'm definitely worried. The fact that President Trump, in his quite, I think, big speech in Saudi Arabia, they don't think actually got the international media attention it rightly deserved, was a very big change of step tone of the US, where actually he talked about the need for Palestine to be recognised and the Gazan people to receive aid, if I remember correctly what he was arguing for. And so, yes, I do worry that when you start using food as a weapon, who really is going to come on any TV show and sit here and say, that's right? It doesn't sit well with me. I'm a father of 2 young children. I can't begin to imagine what those mothers in Gaza are having to think in terms of whatever supplies they may have. And it is horrific, the idea that that would be used as a weapon. And so I think Netanyahu and this government, the sooner they're gone and we can get the new face of the Israeli government, the better in terms of coming up with a permanent solution, which is about peace.
Thank you both. It's such a difficult topic to speak about, you know, the emotions that everyone feels looking at what's happening and the kind of grief we all feel. So I appreciate you keeping it respectful. Thank you. Well, earlier, my colleague Mark Austin spoke to the former Israeli Prime Minister, who suggested Benjamin Netanyahu's desire to stay in power will see him continue with his war plans, regardless of international condemnation.
He's afraid that if he will stop the war, it's a day of reckoning for him, because that's the day where immediately, even with 6 weeks of ceasefire, the demand will be very strong to establish a national state inquiry committee into the events of October 7. There will be acceleration of his corruption court case. He will lose probably the extreme right-wingers, Messianic Michiganers, I call them in Yiddish, who are pushing toward recapturing of Gaza and resume settlements there. It's just crazy ideas. And, it's not easy for him. He quite likely will lose his power.
Well, I'm pleased to say we're now joined by the Labour MP Diane Abbott, the former Shadow Home Secretary and now, of course, Mother of the House. Thank you very much for being on the programme. What do you make of the government's response to the situation in Gaza?
I think they're going in the right direction. Some of us were a bit alarmed when, at the beginning of the war, Keir Starmer was saying Israel has a right to defend itself. Clearly, it was awful what happened in 2023, but the Israelis have now killed 50,000 Gazans. That's not about defending themselves. And some of the more right-wing members of the government, they just want to clear all the Palestinians out.
What do you think the UK government should be doing then? You say it's moving in the right direction, but what would you like to see them do?
You know, I think we need to stop sending arms to Israel. I think we need to say clearly that this seems tantamount to genocide, what the Israelis are doing. Actually, genocide is kind of a legal term, but we can say it's tantamount to genocide. And I think we can offer some leadership. In the same way we're offering leadership in Ukraine, we should be offering leadership to the rest of Europe in relation to Gaza.
Should we expel the Israeli ambassador? They've called the Israeli ambassador in, of course.
I don't know, expelling him would... I think it's good that he's been called in. I just think we need to put much more pressure on the Israelis than we have done.
I guess, you mentioned Ukraine there, and what many would say is that this is something that has been started by a terrorist attack on Israel, where people were murdered, raped, taken hostage.
But...
And for Israelis, some feel that this is existential, that there are terrorist groups that don't want them to exist, so they are fighting for their right to exist, and a history where people have wanted Jews to be eliminated.
What the Palestinians, Hamas did was appalling. But since then, the Israelis have killed over 50,000 people. And you can literally see pictures on your television of children starving to death. They're trying to keep out baby food today. I mean, I believe that what is happening is that Netanyahu, who was in court before all of this happened, and his very right-wing allies are keeping the war going because he wants to keep out of court. I think with another Israeli leader, they would have wound it down by now.
We saw, of course, independent candidates taking votes off Labour at the election because of what they saw as a weakness when it comes to Gaza. Do you think that that will continue to happen unless Keir Starmer takes a stronger stance?
People feel very strongly, and not just the Muslim community. People in Hackney feel very strongly. People raise it on the doorstep with Labour MPs. And, to lose 4 Labour constituencies, and others came very close. And because people feel we should have a stronger and a clearer stance. But as I say, we're moving in the right direction now.
If I may, because I don't get the opportunity to interview you every day, I'd like to ask you about a few domestic things as well. Because you have expressed some worries that Keir Starmer is echoing reform in his language about immigration. I just wondered if you could expand on what you mean about that.
Well, when you talk about an island of strangers, I had said publicly to other Labour MPs, my parents loved Britain. You can't migrants love Britain. My parents even had a picture of the Queen on the wall. And so to say they don't want to integrate, to say they're strangers, I think that's very wrong. Of course immigration is an issue. Of course we have to talk about policy. But let's not adopt Enoch Powell-esque language. I just think it's unfair on communities which have given so much to this country and really love this country.
Do you think that talk of people who have worries about integration are wrong?
Well, what can I tell you? I'm a Londoner, I'm a Hackney girl. I mean, for better or worse, Hackney people of all different communities are integrated. I'm not saying people don't get cross, I'm not saying People don't fall out. But you couldn't campaign in Hackney saying Hackney is an island of strangers. People wouldn't know what you were talking about.
I guess maybe that's what Number 10 think, that a message in London doesn't translate so well to other constituencies.
Well, you know, I've been in Parliament this week, and MPs all over the country are alarmed about this, because what you do when you are peddling this idea about, you know, an island of strangers and the dangers that immigrants have caused, what you are doing is you are legitimising Nigel Farage. And I don't believe we'll get a lot of those Reform voters. But what we will do is upset the Labour base.
Is it legitimising racism?
It's legitimising anti-immigrant feeling. And it doesn't help us. You know, if you want an anti-immigrant party to vote for, you're going to vote Reform.
You were talking there about the alarm on the Labour benches about the language around immigration. And, of course, there has been concern over cuts to winter fuel payments and disability benefits as well. How much is that widespread, and how much is it what I guess Number 10 would think of as the usual suspects?
No. People that went out to campaign in the Runcorn by-election and in all the council, they said that was what people were raising on the doorstep. People who are Labour people. And when you do the polling, the top issue isn't immigration. The top issue is winter fuel payments. And then I think third is PIP, you know, the disability payments. That is what people keep raising. And MPs, not London MPs actually, but MPs in those areas in the north and so on, they're very alarmed. The only thing I would say, though, is that in the general election, there were about 90 seats the Labour Party won, and about, well, not just 90 seats, but there were 90 seats that we won, and Reform was second. And that has panicked people. That has panicked people. Now, I think the response to that is to fight them as Labour, not to try and be carbon copies of Nigel Farage. What
do you think of Keir Starmer?
Well, I think he's done very well on some of the foreign policy stuff recently. I was concerned about what he was saying about welfare, what he was doing about welfare. I don't think he understood how much it was upsetting people. He felt it was something he had to do, but I tell you, Labour MPs from all over the country are worried about it.
I guess I was interested where you say the way to tackle Reform is to fight them as Labour. Do you think that Keir Starmer is, I'm trying to work out the right way of putting this, do you think that he is acting as if he belongs in the Labour Party, in the Labour tradition?
Well, all I can say is a lot of people, and not just the usual suspects, as you're saying, were very upset about his speech last week in Island of Strangers. We had a Parliamentary Labour Party meeting on Monday, and, you know, what happens in the PLP stays in the PLP. But as we were coming out, some of the people, because I spoke to people in the day, some of the people who were most alarmed said, you know, if he'd spoken like that on Monday, we wouldn't have all been so upset, because he talked about wanting to lead a unified party. He talked about wanting to fight Farage's Labour. I think it was just some of the language last week that upset people.
So what's going on then? Do you think that he is saying things that he doesn't really believe because he's been advised badly by someone Number 10?
I think he's been advised badly. I think that in Number 10, elements in Number 10 think the way to fight Farage is to sound like Farage. And some of us don't think being a kind of milk and water version of Farage is going to win us many constituencies.
So what would you say to those advisors? They might be watching now. They probably are.
I would say try giving him better advice. Try giving him better advice, because the advice you're giving him about immigration, what did you say about immigration, isn't working. It's not working for him, and it's not working for the Labour Party.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Diane Abbott there from the Labour Party. Now, yesterday we had a new deal with the EU, and today, of course, the Prime Minister was talking up to MPs in the Commons. And Brexit, of course, has had a huge impact on British business. One of Britain's top businessmen and a Conservative peer, Lord Stuart Rose, campaigned for us to stay in the EU. He's the former M&S CEO, the former Asda co-chief executive, and I've been speaking to him about what he makes of the new deal. Lots to talk about, but it feels like we should start with Brexit, because Keir Starmer has said that his Brexit deal will lower bills, increase jobs and strengthen the UK's borders. And of course, you were the chair of the Remain campaign, but do you agree with Keir Starmer that his deal's a good one?
I can't say whether Keir Starmer's particular claims will come true, but what we have to understand is that the world has changed. It's 9 years since we voted to come out of Europe. It's 5 years since we did the deal. The world has changed, and you've seen how dramatically it's changed in the last 6 or 9 months. The economy has changed. People's view on the economy has changed. People's attitudes towards politicians have changed, and we have to adapt. And I think that if we're now in a situation where we have cast ourselves off, if you like, metaphorically as a raft in the North Sea, we're no longer talking to our European friends, and we weren't. We haven't done a significant deal with the Americans. We've done a deal with the Indians, which is okay, but only a half okay. We've done a very small deal, which was sort of really biased against us, probably with the Australians. And we need to link up with somebody, because 70 million people on their own in the North Sea trying to survive in this tough world is going to be hard.
Do you think we've seen benefits of Brexit? I mean, you mentioned there the India deal. We're talking, of course, to the US.
We have lost more from Europe since we came out of Europe than we have made up from other countries. That is the economic fact. And the economic fact is it doesn't matter which party you support. It doesn't matter anything about what you think. The facts are, and go and talk to the economists, they will tell you that we are net worse off. And if we're net worse off, we have to fill that hole. And, you know, we could say that what Keir Starmer has done yesterday is a very, very small part of filling the hole, £9 billion between now and 2040, but it's a start.
Kemi Badenoch says it's a betrayal.
Well, I'm quite shocked. Listen, I'm a Conservative, and I believe in Conservative values. I'm a free marketeer, but I'm not an active and aggressive Conservative. But I think what's interesting is that when I mentioned earlier things have changed, what has changed is, of course, the whole dynamic of politics has changed. I mean, you see what's happened in America, you've seen what's happening in Europe, people are moving towards the right. And I think if I look back at my business career and what's guided me or guides business people is that our job, if we are selling things to people in a consumer society, is to be ahead of our customers. I think politicians' jobs ought to be ahead of the electorate, and I think they're trailing behind. And if you're just going to go around aping or trying to ape what somebody else might do, that is not a unique and innovative way of running a party. I think what the party needs to do is it needs to sit down, put a cold towel on its head, think very, very hard about what consumers want, what the electorate wants, and come up with some innovative ideas. And there's a long way to go.
I mean, a new YouGov poll today put the Conservatives in 4th place behind the Lib Dems.
What does that tell you? Tells you they're not doing it right.
Do you think that Kemi Badenoch is the right person to lead the Conservatives?
I don't know Kemi Badenoch very well. I don't know her at all. In fact, I'm not in touch with the leadership of the party, but I am interested in what's going on. I do keep up with things. I keep up with events. I keep up with gossip. And at the end of the day, we've got a lot of catching up to do.
What's the gossip saying then?
Well, gossip says, look, there's a lot of catching up to do. This is a marathon. Let's suppose we're going to run the 23 or 24 miles of a marathon. We're probably in mile 1, they might claim. But you've got to get the pace up. We've got to get those rates up because there will be an election in 2029. There is a very strong push now coming from reform. We have seen the Labour Party, after a very, very slow and tough and laborious start, begin to deliver one or two quite interesting things. Does that resonate with the electorate? I suspect it might. Go and ask them. Now, am I pleased? And I think the electorate will be pleased that their children, your children, you've got children, I think, can go out in time and start getting back into the Erasmus programme. Are you worried about the fact that some of these Europeans might come here for a short time and enjoy our culture? I don't suspect you are. Are you pleased that you might be able to actually get your foodstuffs at a slightly cheaper and more effective way coming from Europe? Are you happy about the fact even when you go on holiday, you might be able to get through the electronic barrier a bit more quickly? These are crowd-pleasing things.
If you look at the polling, Nigel Farage is the one who's really benefiting. You said once that you'd leave the country if he becomes Prime Minister.
I stick to it. I will.
You might have to start, doing a bit of research into where you're going to go.
God might intervene. I might drop dead before then, so we don't know.
I'm keen to talk about business as well. You're obviously, a bit of a titan, I think it's fair to say, British business.
I wish.
You've been involved in some of our most prestigious and well-known companies. Do you think this government is a friend of business?
Well, I had very severe doubts about what Labour did against what Labour said before they got elected. There was a sort of vacuum, and it was almost as if they had been shocked that they had got elected, and it was a little bit about what shall we do now. Now, I would have hoped, had that been a business plan, that we would have had a plan A and we'd have had a plan B and we'd have got straight on with it. So the start was very slow. I'm afraid that, it was a very uncomfortable and difficult time when we were going through that bing bang bosh in the late summer and autumn of last year, where whether it was panic or whether it was just trying to make an ideological point, taxes went up through national insurance and whatever else. They were very, very, very focused on large employers. Retail is the largest private employer in the UK, 2 million plus people. And companies like the one at that time that I was chairing got very severely hit. Now, I can't for the life of me understand why they didn't spread those taxes more evenly, but I'm sure the Chancellor's got a reason for it. So business has been really, really hard hit. Consumers and consumer confidence has been very low. We might argue, or the government might argue, that having had a quarter of 0.7% growth, that, things are looking better. But, one swallow doesn't make a summer. Ask business what they're doing. In businesses that I'm involved with and people that I talk to who run businesses, they're keeping their balance sheets very strong. They're not borrowing money just yet because they're not sure about what the future looks like. They're keeping costs down to a minimum, which will have an effect on hiring of people until they can see a clear runway. And what the government needs to show us is not a runway which is reaching through till the end of 25, but a runway which is reaching through to 26, 27 and 28, so that you can plan, I can plan, consumers can plan, and that's how you get investment going.
We've got the spending review coming up.
Beth is late.
Things do look very difficult again in the spending review. What do you think would happen if the Chancellor put up taxes again?
Well, listen, the Chancellor has got a tough job in the spending review. At the end of the day, what's happened in terms of the fact that the buffer that she has got is down to £9 or £10 billion is self-inflicted, because actually on the first week of government or the first month or two of government, they gave the rail people a lot of increase, they gave the medical people a lot of increase, they blamed it all on the Conservatives in terms of the £20 billion black hole, but a lot of it was self-inflicted. Now, what we haven't done in a society which needs spending on infrastructure, it needs spending on the judicial system, it needs spending on the education system, and most of all, of course, we've seen it needs spending on defence. It hasn't said that on the other side of the table, we will cut here or cut there or cut whatever. They put £23 billion into the health service. I know not very much about the health service, but I did do a report on leadership there some time ago, and it's clear to me that there is a huge efficiency to be had. Now, they've got rid of National Health England, but the proof in the pudding will that actually benefit a change? We have to do something about welfare costs. Now, if you did those things, it would give you enough wriggle room to spend the money on the areas that needed it without possibly having to put up taxes.
Just finally, and I know it was a while ago where you were involved with M&S, but we obviously saw that pretty sophisticated cyber hack hitting M&S, and it does feel like it's not the only company that is impacted by this kind of thing. How much of a risk is it at the minute for British companies, this kind of attacks?
Well, listen, you have to understand, there are people trying to hack almost every system around, everywhere, all the time. Some people are criminal. Some people are just clever young people who think this is a good wheeze and see what they can do. If there was that young guy many years ago who managed to hack in from Croydon, I think, into the Pentagon, right? You have to be on your guard. And my analogy is it's a bit like living in a street, right? You've got the person who's got no burglar alarm, you've got the person who's got the medium burglar alarm, and you've got the person who's got the ultra-sophisticated burglar alarm. You have to keep spending to make sure you're at the ultra-sophisticated end to keep these guys out. They won't stop.
Do we need to be more careful about who we're giving our personal data to?
Well, we all need to. I mean, I'm quite savvy. I feel for people who aren't particularly savvy, but even every morning, I'm getting 4 or 5 different, suspect emails every morning. What do? I just go through my little routine check. I check the email address. I check for a spelling mistake. I check for, is it the same one? If it's from a company that you or I might know, is it the same email address as I had last time? Particularly ones who say I'm delivering you a parcel. Particularly ones who say you haven't paid this bill here. Particularly ones who say sign up for this or that. You just have to be careful. But it's tough, and I feel for not very digitally savvy people, but be careful. And if you're in any doubt, don't answer it, don't open it, and ask somebody.
Good advice. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Well, listening to that interview is the Treasury Minister, James Murray. Good to have you on the programme. So it was interesting talking to Lord Rose there. Obviously, a big backer of Remain. He says that the Brexit deal is a step in the right direction, but we're worse off as a country because of Brexit. Is he right?
I think we have to accept what happened at the Brexit referendum And I think we as a party do, we as a government do. We said, look, we're not rejoining the EU. We've got red lines when it comes to freedom of movement, single market customs union. But within those red lines, we need to do what's in our national interest. We need to get a better deal for Britain, and that's what we've got this week. And it's a landmark deal. You know, this is really good.
Is
for
it
Britain.
a landmark deal?
Well, it's really good.
I'm asking, but genuinely, you know, you can say if it's a good or a bad deal, but is it a landmark deal? I mean, you're not talking about. There's nothing on services. There's nothing on youth mobility. Is it a landmark? You're talking about e-gates.
If you look at what this unlocks in terms of British jobs, in terms of bringing down the cost of food at the checkout, if you look at what it does for economic growth, 9 billion a year by 2040, if you look at what it delivers, and this is the deal that we've done now, and there's a promise to work further on measures in the coming years. You know, this shows that we can actually act in the national interest, and we've done this as an independent country, independent Britain, you know, doing what we think is in our national interest, and we can show that that's good for Britain. It's good. It's good common sense. Because I think, you know, however people voted in the referendum a few years ago, if you turn around to people and say, look, this helps us to trade, it helps people to export, it helps us to import, it brings down the prices at the checkout, it supports British jobs. You know, do you think this is good common sense? I think most people would say yes.
Well, I've got the polling, and you know, it's pretty split. I'll be honest. The polling from YouGov shows that British people don't really know what to think. 29% think the deal's a good thing. 26% say it's bad. I mean, I feel like it's a bit like if you polled someone on Magnolia wallpaper, they wouldn't really know because there's just not whatever. It doesn't really feel like it's that radical, does it?
But I suppose what matters for me is people feeling the impact in their lives. Because one thing that I've definitely heard from my constituents and when I've been campaigning in different places across the country is that people want to feel that change that we were talking about. So when I'm talking to people knocking on doors, and I can say, well, look, the minimum wage has gone up, the waiting lists for NHS have come down. People say, OK, that's all great, but we want to see more change. And for me, what's really crucial about this deal and the other two we've done is the impact on people's lives, and they can feel the change.
Talking about the impact on people's lives, something that has been coming up an awful lot on the doorstep is winter fuel allowance. And we were speaking to the Labour MP, Diane Abbott, earlier on the programme, and she was saying that this is something that is coming up again and again as the #1 issue for a lot of Labour voters. Do you admit that it's something that people feel deeply unhappy about?
Well, I was just talking about when I was knocking on doors during the recent elections, and it is true that some people mentioned the winter fuel payment, but some of the context that people put around that when they were talking to me was saying, look, we know you had to take tough decisions. What we want to feel is the benefit, what you can do on the back of those tough decisions. So we want to feel, NHS waiting lists coming down. We want to feel more money in our pockets. We want to feel economic growth, better public services. And I could point to some examples of what we've done in the first 9 or 10 months. But they said, OK, that's great, but we want you to do a lot more. So for me, the context of it is that people accept that we inherited a mess. They accept that we inherited a black hole in public finances. They know we had to do difficult decisions to fix the public finances, get public services back on their feet, but they're impatient to feel all the benefits. We've made some changes, but they want more. We want more as a government, and that's what we need to get on with.
I'd like to talk to you about Gaza, because the government has said that it's suspended trade talks with Israel and summoned the ambassador due to the blockade of aid in Gaza. This blockade has been going on for weeks, so I guess my question is, why now?
Well, we think now is the right time to use these tools that we have to make very clear our position on this, that we are strongly opposed to the Israeli offensive in Gaza.
Why is now the right time, then?
Well, that's for the Foreign Secretary, obviously, to determine when the right time to use different tools are. But, he's been clear that we will take concrete action to back up our points, and these are some of those concrete actions. So there's the free trade agreement negotiations, which have been paused. There's also for the settlers, the sanctions against people who are associated with violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, because actually the West Bank is an important part of what's going on in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories as well. So, I think what's important about this is it's showing what tools we have to stand behind the points we're making, and we want the Israeli offensive in Gaza to come to an end. We want aid to get in. We want the hostages to be released. And we want this horrific conflict to come to an end.
Some people will think, they'll disagree with your actions. Other people will think that you are not going far enough in terms of action against Israel. But there has been a change of tone. It's a change of tone that's not just happened in the UK, but also in Canada, in France as well. Would you like to see the US joining the condemnation that we've seen of the Israeli actions in Gaza?
Well, I know that the US has been doing work with other countries in the region to try and get a ceasefire back in place. So they're playing their role. It's obviously for them to lead on their foreign policy, but we need to work with the US, with other countries in the region to try and make sure the ceasefire comes back into force. Because, as I said, for us, we need to stop the military offensive, we need to get aid in, and we need to get the hostages all to be released. And we have to get that ceasefire in place. And I think when we see reports or pictures on the TV of what's happening in terms of aid now not getting in, when we think of the families of hostages who've been separated from their loved ones for so long now, this is intolerable for this conflict to continue any further. And so that's why we said, in terms of the free trade agreement, which you mentioned, we want to suspend those negotiations because we can't continue negotiating at this point with a government who is taking actions that we don't think are in the UK or the wider region's interests, and that's the point that we're making very clearly.
OK, thank you very much indeed, James Murray, speaking to us there. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, lots more reaction to that. We're going to bring back our panel, Jonathan Gullis and Caroline Lucas. We'll have that next. Right, let's bring our duo back, shall we? I've got Jonathan Gullis and Caroline Lucas with us. So there's been so much talk about this Brexit deal. On the one hand, the government said it's a landmark deal. On the other hand, it's been called a great Brexit betrayal. I always suspect the truth is somewhere in the middle of these things, right? Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, I always think politics at Sam and Anne's, and I'm shamelessly plugging it now for them. But when they summed up that the deal was basically to set up a discussion about another deal, I think that was the best summary I could come up with. Ultimately, there's lots more questions that are left unanswered than answered. I know that, the James Murray wants to convince us that food prices are coming down on supermarket shelves, but doesn't tell us when that will happen. So when will we see the checkout get cheaper for supermarkets? Have any of the supermarkets told us when prices will come down on those shelves? Because if it does, then absolutely, that will be a huge win. But I'm very sceptical about whether or not we'll actually see that come through. And then on the other hand, paying in to be able to procure defence deals seems a bit odd, to buy into something to be able to then try and take a bit out. And ultimately, the big thing that's sat on the table is the future of this EU youth mobility scheme, or is it youth experience scheme now that Keir Starmer's trying to desperately brand. What does that look like? Will it be capped or not? It seems quite odd to have had a big speech last week about migration and then be opening the door to potentially allow tens of millions of migrants coming from the EU. So undermines the very argument.
Tens of millions?
Well, reality is, we don't know, for example, will Albania be able to bring people over as someone who's applying to join the EU? Will Turkey? We'll be back there again.
You are just reheating all of the Brexit arguments, and they didn't work very well before, and they're not working now. The idea that this youth mobility scheme is somehow going to open the floodgates to Turkey is just, frankly,
well, they want
bonkers.
to be members of the EU, Caroline.
Yes, I know, but they're not members of the EU, are they? And we haven't had millions of people coming before, and we're not going to have them now. What we are going to have, I hope, is some way for our young people to have an opportunity to travel to other European countries and for them to come here. There is going to be a cap, that's been said. And, young people absolutely deserve some good news. For heaven's sake, they've got a pretty rough deal right now, and we all benefited from that kind of deal, and they should be able to as well. The idea it's a landmark agreement, I think, is pushing it somewhat. I'm very glad it happened. I'm glad the conversations are happening, but it's got to go much further than this. The EU accounted for 41% of our exports. This is our most near neighbour and the most important neighbour. I think we should be going back into the customs union and genuinely doing something for the economy as well as for our young people.
I wanted to ask you why I've got you, Jonathan, off the back of the interview with Lord Rose, who, of course, is a Conservative peer with concerns about the direction that the Conservative Party are heading in. And I put to him the fact that the latest poll had the Conservatives in fourth place, behind not just Reform and Labour, but also the Lib Dems. How worried are you about that?
Well, as you know, I've said on the show for a number of times when I've come on, I think the Conservative Party is currently in a death spiral. I think it's that serious and it is existential. And the Conservative Party, Kemi's team, and actually all members of Parliament need to have a quick, urgent meeting to figure out what on earth they're going to do, because it's been quite feeble from what I can see in terms of MPs, the shadow cabinet. I don't see enough of them putting up enough of a fight. I only see real Robert Jenrick leading the charge in that regard. I don't see enough backbenchers really going out their way to try and suck it to the opposition. They get so caught up in trying to be impressive in the chamber without realising very few people are listening to them there. Whereas Nigel Farage is doing a social media clip from Reform HQ and getting over 700,000 to 1 million views on Twitter alone. So at the end of the day, there has to be a reality check here. The Conservative Party is, as I say, fighting for its very survival. And if it gets to May next year, where we could come 5th in Wales and potentially even 5th in Scotland and lose even more councillors, what donors going to want to give to the party, what voters are going to then think the only way to stop Labour is to vote Reform, and ultimately, again, what's the future for the Conservative Party? I actually, for the first time in my life, don't have an answer on how to save the Conservative Party.
Is it time for a change of leader? Which I know feels ridiculous because, it's not that long since the last election.
My problem is, in 2019, when Theresa May was, thank God, got rid of, it was quite obvious who should take over Boris Johnson. It is not obvious to me that whoever could come in after Kemi Badenoch could improve the situation enough that we would be at least level with Labour and level with Reform. So changing leader, creating more drama, creating more headlines, which is a gift to Labour and a gift to Reform. So my real fear is that actually it just needs the MPs to realise they're in opposition. You need to make a lot more noise, work a lot harder, and actually represent the membership who are crying out to actually see some fight.
Well, Labour is giving you quite a few possible goals to score, but it's just not happening. And, I agree with what Diane Abbott was saying earlier, that I'm deeply concerned that the idea seems to be in the leadership of Labour that somehow by aping Reform, that's the way to see them off, whereas all of the evidence from around Europe and beyond is that when sort of centre or left parties try to ape that kind of rhetoric, all it does is to drive people to...
Good news for Lib Dems and Green Party, though, right, if they do that?
Well, it is, but I don't really want the country to go down the tubes, even though I would love to see the Green Party do well from it. You know, I want to see a progressive left. I would love to see us working more closely together, and if we had a fairer voting system, we could do that. But in the meantime, let's not have a Labour Party that is basically unrolling the carpet for reform by things like the winter fuel allowance cuts, by the two-child benefit cap, by this immigration language that doesn't ring true. You know, it doesn't ring true. Nobody really thinks that that's what Keir Starmer...
That speech last week from Keir Starmer blew my mind, because no one on the right believes him, and on the left, everyone's going to just be more angry. He's literally gifting voters to the Greens and Liberal Democrats whilst convincing no one who might vote Conservative or Reform.
Really interesting to talk to both of you. Thank you very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Now, it's the 20th anniversary of one of the TV's most famous political satires, The Thick of It, and we're going to put our panel to the test over what is more foul-mouthed, the show or our real politicians.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the family of a girl who drowned at a water park tell me that the government has to act to ensure that her death can never be repeated. 11-year-old Kyra Hill was found almost 2 hours after disappearing at Liquid Leisure. A coroner ruling she was unlawfully killed with gross breaches of health and safety to blame. Today, her parents Leonard and Heather had a message for the Prime Minister. That and much more to come on the UK Tonight from 8.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now.
It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon.
Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on. A lot of heat still.
We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Oh!
Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
20 clubs, 10 matches, one final day. It's Premier League Championship Sunday. Broadcasting and streaming live. The Champions League chase comes to an end. And Liverpool are crowned in front of the Anfield faithful. Premier League Championship Sunday. All starting at 11 a.m. Brought to you by Expedia.
Right, now this could go one of two ways, I'm not going to lie. We are about to do a quiz where we have to guess if it was said in the thick of it, which is celebrating its anniversary, or if it's a real politician who said it. And here, of course, we've got Jonathan, we've got Caroline. We couldn't do a thick of it quiz without John Craig, clearly, our chief political correspondent. So, right, let's crack on, shall we? Let's do it. Yeah. First one, I think we can animate as if by magic here. This is the first quote. So is this the thick of it, or is this a politician? This is excruciating. Their commas are awful. His utter incompetence in every sense is now offending me on behalf of politicians everywhere. He is a bleep clown.
That last line makes me think of a certain ex-special advisor who I won't name for the sake of their anonymity, but I'm going to go politician on that one.
John, what do you reckon?
Was it Dominic Cummings?
It wasn't, but it was a politician. This was actually text messages from Nicola Sturgeon at the Coven inquiry about Boris Johnson.
That's right, I remember.
There you go.
I thought it was somebody talking about Johnson.
Yeah, exactly.
Clown is the giveaway.
Clown could be either. Right, we're going to rattle through. Next one. Okay. Okay, you're going to get this one. This is a classic of the genre. Does anyone ever say, you know you've done a bleep good job? Because everyone else has sat on their bleep and done nothing. No signs of that, no.
Gillian Keegan.
Exactly. It was Gillian Keegan.
Who was the Nicola Murray of the last government, in my view.
Gillian Keegan, former Education Secretary. Very good. Yeah. Points all round. Right, next one. He's back to Jaws mode, bleep. I've literally said the same thing 10 bleep times and he still won't absorb it. I've had to sit here for 2 hours to stop him from saying stupid bleep.
I think that's the programme.
Yeah, the thick of it.
That's the thick of it.
Malcolm Tucker.
It was actually Dominic Cummings.
Oh, that was Cummings.
We've got to get him in there time, right? Got to get him in there.
That's quite tame for Dominic.
Yeah.
I mean, mixed language could be quite fruity.
You take that as a win, that's a positive day for you if you're on the end of that one.
Right, next one. How much bleep bleep is there on the menu and what bleep flavour is it?
I'm going to say politician because I want this to be a politician. This sounds like it's going to be quite amusing.
It was actually Malcolm Tucker. That one's got to be allegedly inspired by Alistair Campbell. What about this one? This is a bleep joke. Bleep bleep Chancellor. He goes into debt every time he passes a sweet shop. I love
that's
it.
a politician. That's lovely.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's basically me, I'll be honest. It was actually thick of it. Very good. And finally, the last one here we've got. I'm bleep bored of it. I'm working my bleep off without having to go back and forth on doorsteps about the psychodrama.
Oh, that's a politician. That sounds like one of my colleagues would have definitely written that. Could have been
Is
me.
it you? Is it you? I think
Could
it's
have
you.
been me.
I'm going to go for you.
I'm quite worried now. This might be me. Actually, this feels like, this is looking strangely familiar.
That must date from the Tory, the last months of the Tory government.
Actually, it's me.
Can I just say, the gradual realisation is one of the funniest things I've ever seen on TV. Sounds like it could be me. No, actually, I think it is me.
It was the board bit, yeah. I don't know, some thankful leaker from some WhatsApp group, yeah.
It was your leaked messages.
What prompted that then?
I think it was trying to rally the troops and say, I all know that we're all about to go off the cliff at the next general election, but could we just please try and look vaguely competent in the lead up to that, because it's pretty tiresome.
I love it. And also, we've managed to get through the whole segment with no swearing, which I think is absolutely well done all round. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Thanks, John. Thanks, Jonathan and Caroline. That is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it's the UK Tonight. See you tomorrow.